project is on Harriet Tubman. I hope you enjoy. Hi, I'm Harriet Tubman. My birth name was Arminta Ross. My mother nicknamed me Minty. I was born a slave in the plantation of Edward Brodus in Dorchester County, Maryland. My mother, Rit Green, was owned by Mary Pattison Brodus. My father, Ben Ross, was owned by Anthony Thompson. In 1825, I was hired out to other households. My first outside job was as a nursemaid, where I was frequently and violently beaten when I let the baby cry. I was then hired to set musket traps. Because of the nature of the job, I fell ill and was sent back to Brodus. I had 8 siblings: Linnea, Maria, Riddy, Soph, Robert, Ben, Rachel, Henry, and Moses. 3 of my sisters, Maria, Riddy, Linnea, and Soph, were sold to slavery in the deep South due to our owner, Brodus, dying, leaving the plantation in a dire financial situation. When I was a teenager, I suffered a head injury when an overseer threw a heavy metal at a runaway slave and instead hit me in the head. As a result of the injury, I suffered from sleeping spells. I would suddenly fall asleep and it was difficult to wake me. It gave me visions and dreams that I considered signs from God. Religion, faith was the reason I risked my life guiding slaves to freedom. By 1835, about 14 years before I escaped, about half of the African American population on the eastern shore of Maryland was free. In 1844, I married John Tubman, a free African American. After I escaped, I came back for him, but he had married another woman. Before escaping, I changed my name from Arminta to Harriet, after my mother, and adopted my husband's last name. In 1849, me and my 2 brothers, Harry and Ben, successfully escaped from the Poplar Neck plantation. Ben and Harry had second thoughts and returned to the plantation. I decided to continue and successfully made it to Pennsylvania, a free state. I used the Underground Railroad, a network used by fugitive slaves to escape to free territories. They were aided by abolitionists and free African Americans who guided them to secret routes and safe houses. In 1840, my father, Ben Ross, was manumitted when he turned 45 years old. I found out that my mother's owner's will stipulated she and her children be manumitted when they reached 45 years old. Brodus refused to honor his mother's will. My first trip to bring a family to freedom was in 1850. I brought my niece, Keisa, her husband John Bally, and their 2 children. In 10 years conducting the Underground Railroad, I made 19 trips and guided my parents, siblings, relatives, and friends for a total of around 300 slaves. Some were guided by me and others followed my instructions. I usually worked during winter months to avoid being caught, and on Saturday night because the newspapers would publish runaway notices on Monday morning. I was nicknamed Moses by abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. I carried a handgun for self-protection and to urge slaves not to give up. Many of the slaves I guided were never captured. In 1859, I helped recruit supporters for the John Brown Harper's Ferry raid. John Brown was executed in December. John Brown called me General Tubman. I used disguises to avoid getting caught. I dressed as a man, old woman, or middle-class free African American. I was the first woman to lead an assault during the Civil War. I conducted the Combahee River Raid, which set free 700 slaves. During the Civil War, I worked as a nurse and a cook. My knowledge of local plants helped me cure soldiers with dysentery. In 1858, New York Senator William Seward made me a proposition. He would sell me his property in Auburn, New York, for a reasonable price and flexible terms. Auburn had a strong abolitionist group, and Seward was a well-known supporter of the Underground Railroad, who I could depend on for funds and shelter for my people. Before the Civil War, about 500 slaves passed through Auburn on their way north. I knew Senator Seward well, as I had used his house as a station many times. I was encouraged to move to Auburn by a longtime friend and supporter, Lucretia Mott. I had been living in North Street in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, west since 1851. That was my home and my base of operation. I brought my parents and my entire family to St. Catharines, where we lived safe from slave catchers. But I could not resist the offer, and in 1858 we sealed the deal for $1,200. I brought my parents from St. Catharines to live with me in Auburn, New York. In 1866, my house was destroyed by fire. None were hurt. Nelson was a brickmaker and helped rebuild her house. He replaced the original wood structure with brick, making it stronger and longer lasting. In 1860, I took my last mission to rescue my sister. When I arrived, I found out that she had died. Instead, I took the Annales family. They had an infant and had to be drugged with paregoric in order to keep quiet. During the Civil War, I was paid $200 over a period of 3 years. I supported myself by selling pies. In 1865, the Civil War ended. I returned home to Auburn, New York. I claimed that the government owed me $966 for my services as a scout from May 25th, 1862 to January 31st, 1865. That is $30 a month for 32.5 months of service. However, scouts and spies were paid $60 a month and Army soldiers $15 a month. It took me 34 years to get a veteran's pension. On March 1869, when I was about 59 years old, I married Nelson Davis, who was 22 years younger. We spent the next 20 years together. Nelson suffered tuberculosis and could not work on a consistent basis. In 1864, we adopted a baby girl named Gertie. Me and Nelson had a garden in our backyard where we grew vegetables and raised pigs and chickens. On October 18, 1888, my husband Nelson Davis died. My first authorized biography, Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman, was published in 1869 by Sarah Hopkins Bradford. I received $1,200 from its publication. After the Civil War, I became involved in the cause for women's suffrage. I gave speeches in Boston, New York, and Washington. When I was unable to sleep, I underwent brain surgery in Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital. I refused anesthesia, and I insisted to chew a bullet just like the soldiers did when they had their legs amputated. I donated my property to the African Methodist Zion Church in Auburn to be converted into a home for the aged and indigent colored people. And now, my friend Zoe is going to tell you more information on the Underground Railroad. Hi, I'm Zoe, and I'm going to tell you information on the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad, UR, was not underground, nor was it a railroad. It was called underground because of its secretive nature, and railroad because it was an emerging form of transportation. The UR was an informal network and had many routes. Most routes went to northern states, others went south to Mexico or the Caribbean. Historians estimate that about 100,000 slaves escaped using the UR network. A lot of the people involved in saving slaves were Quakers and Methodists. Railroad language was adopted as secret codes used by agents, station masters, conductors, operators, stockholders, and all of those involved in saving slaves. Coded songs were used by slaves. Levi Coffin was known as the president of the Underground Railroad, and his home is the Grand Station of the Underground Railroad. The history of the UR goes back to the 1780s and became known as such in the 1830s. It reached its height in the 1850s and ended in 1863 when President Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation. The most famous supporters of the UR are Harriet Tubman, Levi Coffin, William Steele, Frederick Douglass, Thomas Garrett, William Lloyd Garrison, John Brown, Samuel Green, Garrett Smith, Lucretia Coffin Mott, among others. UR stations have secret hideouts such as passages, basements, cellars, and hidden compartments, and cupboards where slaves were safely hidden. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it more difficult for slaves to escape. The law allowed for slaves to be returned to their masters even though they were in a free state. The final destination became Canada. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, any person who was caught helping a slave escape or offering shelter could be sent to jail for 6 months or subjected to a $1,000 fine. Bibliography. I got my information from harriettubman.org. special thank you to my mama for helping me and to Easy Peasy for hosting the competition.